We have to use this moment to win people over into a principled, anti-racist, anti-Zionist, pro-peace narrative moving.
Oh my God. Typing. Can everyone hear me? Rejoice, comrades. John the Brazen is here. Hi, John. Rejoice, comrades. Mod extraordinaire. Shanna. Hi, darling. How's the clicking gone? I was typing, I was promoting myself in Discord. Hello, hello. I suppose I better learn about modern monetary theory so I can at least contribute better. Yes. Fantastic. And hopefully I'll be able to hear this without having to use my phone this time. I've been fiddling with my audio and I think I might have got it correct. Fingers crossed. Oh, I've been fixing up the lighting as well. I might put an overhead lamp, like clip it on. There's a bookcase with most of my DVDs. They're mine's, my DVDs. The books are split. The majority of the books are Super Hubbies, but I have collections as well, and they're still in plastic boxes. Oh, maybe we should find a video about Keynesianism. I think that's the post-war era, isn't it? But we've got Mr. Murphy here, who got recommended to us by Carlina, obviously. You will see me celebrating at some point in 2 hours-ish, because that's when my money will be paid to me. And there's things I'm buying off of Amazon that I need. Shanna, darling, once they arrive, I will show them that they're for the Kane game whenever Raptor starts it again. Gorgeous dice. They are £5 and I'm getting them through Prime. So the minute my money lands, I'll be ordering things. Yeah, well, that's why I'm trying to beef up my knowledge and stuff so I can understand a bit better. And it's probably going to be a good idea because the economy might actually get talked about towards the Holyrood elections, and having a better understanding might actually help me canvass better. Well, it'll definitely open my eyes, but will give me a better understanding. I kind of get it. I know my way around a three-column. Oh, I used to be a bar manageress, so I've done all the buying for for the bar and the wages of the staff. Rejoice, comrades! Linton is here. Hi, Linton. MMT tonight because I need to beef up my knowledge. And why not educate everyone else? Always a good idea, he thinks. Hmm. Well, I'll bring up my YouTube chat. Give me a second. You can just go in there a minute. Do 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 do. Oh, now the volume is down. Right? YouTube. YouTube. Lurk away, darling. Lurk away. I will be here. Oh, God. Uh, I've managed to rescue my brother-in-law, my younger sister's partner, till he's to be Tory. At least he doesn't like Manfrog. That is one thing. But I've managed to get him to Scottish Labour just as bad. And I hate Anna Sauer with a passion. Oh, I think that person's already lost. Might this be an older Gen Xer or Boomer? My cohort isn't completely decent. You have to realise that. So the older Gen Xers, the ones born before, don't get me wrong, there's Boomers who are based. And also how mine are. Oh, for Christ's sake. That's right on the cutoff. So Gen X is the generations are mostly bunk, but they're still I still use them as a utility essentially. I might be classed as a Xennial because I was born in 79. But my cohort from like 74 onwards, we're mostly leftists. Oh good. At least they're not a party member. I was screaming into the void yesterday on my stream. I was watching Demo, wanting all the unions to disaffiliate. I live in hope, even if it's just a thin hope. Mm. Let us see if this be working. I still haven't figured out how to get to allow raids on my YouTube. I will figure it out. I've been wandering around my YouTube studio on my laptop this time, not my phone. And I still can't find it, even though I watched the tutorial earlier on. I'll figure it out, don't worry. That might work. Yeah, please, please work. So if I need to talk, I will pause so you can hear. Take it away, Richard.
What is modern monetary theory? You cannot take part in discussion about economics these days without hearing the term modern monetary theory come up. And it's important to understand what it is because a great deal that is said about MMT, as I will refer to it throughout this video, is complete nonsense. Some of its supporters don't help MMT by making claims about it, which are frankly entirely unfounded and even untrue.
Can everyone hear the video? I just realised something. I think that's where I went wrong in the past. Oh. Oh. Allowed. Sorry about that, Linton. So yeah, let's see. What's your source? Operates on overguide. Yeah.
And almost everything that is said about it by its opponents is, let's be honest, largely a work of fiction because they want to, for reasons that are not apparent to me, deny the truth implicit within it. There is, in fact, very little about MMT that is either very radical, new, or unusual. It is simply a description of the way in which money is created and used by central government in a modern fiat currency economy. Now, I am aware that I've already used a number of terms that are quite complicated. For example, how money is used. We must remember that money is debt, and debt is created by bank lending. We must also remember that fiat currency is not backed by any form of asset. It is not linked to gold or silver or anything else. It is simply a government promise to pay that gives a fiat currency its value. And what we're talking about is how money of that type is created by the government and how that money created by the government functions within the economy of which we're all a part. Most of the time, most of economics tries to ignore this issue. It pretends, in many cases, that money hardly exists, which is quite absurd, because, of course, money does not only exist, but the existence of money and the management of money is a major part of the management of the economy. So, to have a theory which explains how money works is really important, and that's what MMT does, and that is why I think it is core to the understanding of macroeconomics. So having said all that as a preamble, let's talk about how this thing works. MMT says that a government that has its own central bank and its own currency, which in a
Like
country
us.
like the United Kingdom would be the Bank of England and the pound sterling, and with that currency being internationally acceptable, which we know the pound sterling is, then that government need neither tax nor borrow before spending, because its entire government expenditure can be funded by new money creation by its central bank acting on its behalf, with the government then being indebted to its central bank for the sum that it's expended. Let me put that another way. The government can simply tell its central bank, please make a payment to whoever the government wishes, and the central bank is required to mark up the government's overdraft to make the payment, and there does not need to be any money there to allow the payment to take place, because the mere process
That'll be interesting, Calmarks. Recently, I listened to his book, and apparently he predicted. Yes, kinda. It's been a while since I've read the Grundrisa. I did gym in school, by the way, but it's been a hot minute. Yes, and people seem to point this out disingenuously, of course. You have to remember when the Grundrisa was written. Give me a second. There's no one in my YouTube chat yet. Where are we? Go. When did he write it? The foundation of the political program, Grundrisa, management by Marx. He originally wrote it in 1858, but it didn't get, actually didn't get published until 59. Wow, auspicious year.
of increasing the overdraft does in itself create the money that the government wants to spend into the economy. And that is the core idea at the heart of MMT. Now, a government that borrows in this way from its own central bank need never repay the debt it owes to that central bank for one very good reason. And that is because it owns the bank in question, and therefore the bank in question has no effective claim against the government. But there's a much better reason why it need not make the repayment of at least some of that money which has been created. Because the money made in that way then becomes the money supply of the jurisdiction for which the government is responsible.
Yeah.
And one of the ways in which we can even identify that a jurisdiction or state exists is that a government is able to put into place in that geographic location the currency that it declares to
Didn't get translated into it. Just fucking 70s. My God, my mum would have been a teenager when it got translated. I assume my dad would have read it. He is no longer among us, so I feel safe talking about him. He was a leftist. He was a Marxist, like myself. He had to keep that secret because of his job. But yeah, he probably would have read it. And he would have been a teenager as well when it came out, when it got translated into English at least.
To be legal tender. So, of course, it has to make sure that if it's declared a currency to be legal tender, there must be enough of it available. And by the process of spending money into existence to support its programs, hopefully mandated by a democratic election, then a government can create the money supply that allows that economy to undertake the transactions which will sustain it. So it does not have to repay all that debt. And this is a critical point to understand.
My God, I wonder how he would have felt about that. And yeah, there's tours. Remember, he's buried in London. I might make a pilgrimage. I'm not entirely sure, but that would involve going down. Is it Highgate? I'm sure it's Highgate Cemeteries, and that would involve me travelling down to London. And according to both my sisters, it is far too fucking expensive. And he's brilliant. That's why he gets called Super Hubby. He's been to London before, and he doesn't like it. And that was back in the 90s. Yeah. Oh, how much would that? Just going on the pub crawl of all, it wouldn't have been many pubs, I don't think, but even at that, London places. Yeah, well, that much is pretty evident. The reason my sisters were down there were for their jobs. Well, they've done social things while they're there. My mum's been down for holiday reasons, and she said to me, you'd struggle walking around the place, and Super Hubby would hate the places. But he's not really good on crowds either. Each to their own. He doesn't like big crowds, and he went to a very busy Roman Catholic school, and he doesn't like reasons. And he's got lots of brothers and sisters. Well, no, he's got two sisters and a good few brothers. So he's not a big fan of crowds.
That said, it cannot obviously not clear some of that debt. The reason why is that if you kept on making new currency forever, you would end up with hyperinflation. That obviously is totally
I'm not a
unwise.
Republican. It was
And modern monetary theory, MMT, clearly understands that fact. And so it says there is one fundamental tool that exists to make sure that the government can control inflation. Anybody who says that MMT is not interested in inflation has clearly missed the point about the theory. Because in fact, MMT is obsessed by inflation and how to control it. But what it says is that the major control instrument that we have to stop inflation occurring is taxation. Because
I was
tax
wondering what the crew was
takes the
there for.
money that the government has created as a result of it spending it into existence and brings it back into the central treasury where it is cancelled.
Excuse me.
If you look at a banknote, it says on it, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £5 or whatever. That promise is fulfilled by accepting that note in settlement of your tax liability. When the tax liability is paid, it is finished, it is complete, it is cancelled. You haven't got another liability. So the fact is that paying tax cancels your liability to the government,
Guardians.
and in exactly the same way as repayment of a bank loan cancels the money that was created when a bank loan was advanced, so paying tax cancels the money that the government has put into existence by reason of its spending. This
Thank you, Richard.
is fundamental to the understanding of MMT. The primary tool for the control of inflation is not the interest rate, which you would believe if you listened to neoclassical economics and neoliberal economics and its belief in the use of interest rates through independent central banks to achieve this role.
The ones in Dublin do get used, that much I do know. I've been to Dublin, I've visited it, and they do get used quite a lot in Dublin. So there's cases for and cases against. It just depends on how much it costs to use the tram. We've got this, it's got failings, don't get me wrong. We've got the subway, it's called the Clockwork Orange. It goes to the city centre, to the West End, and just to the other side of the river in the loop, essentially. It's quite good for getting like from the West End to the city centre or thereabouts, or from the West End to just the other side of the river, which is quite good. I like it. So I can get to the West End easily enough on a bus. I can also get into the top half of the city centre, but if I need to get down to the bottom end of the city centre, it's either two buses or bus and subway to St. Enoch's. Better for faff if I'm not feeling too good. I do like that. Oh, ask friends Ross, we can ask him about it.
Instead, taxation is the fundamental tool to control inflation and therefore fiscal policy.
You're waiting no longer than 8 minutes between them, and they're really quite fast. The design, it's just been upgraded. The actual train itself is it's being changed in shape. It used to be a lot more tube-like, really, the actual train. It still needs upgrading. I think they're going to have to, the SPT, Strathclyde Passenger Transport, basically the umbrella organisation. The bus service we've got here, specifically right here, just outside on the street, they are bastards. I hate First Glasgow. They keep on cutting routes and raising their. I don't need to worry as much, or neither does Super Hubby. If you need me to take them anywhere, I get free travel because I'm disabled. Scottish Government pay for me free bus travel across the country essentially, and discounted on trains and subway. So I get 75% off, between 75 and 85% off train fares throughout Scotland with my card as well, which is fucking amazing. Plus, it's a flat 50p to use the subway, which is cheaper than a bus. The single on first buses is 310. Is it 310? I can't remember. It's been a while since I've actually paid for my bus. 310, I think, for a single. What the fuck? Is the bus going on? Most people who do actually pay, so like disabled, OEPs obviously, and under 25's got the Young Scot card. We all get bus passes. So it's basically people who have people who are working. They pay first day's £5.90, so £6 essentially. First weeks are £25. And you've got the zone card, so that covers all modes of transport. That's provided by the SBT, and it's categorised into zones. So you've got zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 takes you out to about, it gets you up to Kirkintilloch, maybe Denny. No, no.
Policy is primary in modern monetary theory. The secondary role of tax in the government's funding cycle is to provide the government-created money of a jurisdiction with value in exchange. Now, this is a little more complicated to understand, but let's be honest, if you were given a £5 note and you had no idea what it was, or you were in Fiji at the time with no opportunity to exchange it into local currency, then that £5 note would, for all practical purposes, be entirely worthless to you. But if you're in the UK, that £5 note, which would be worthless somewhere else, does have value, and the value is created by the fact that the government will accept your money in exchange for tax liabilities owing. Now, in the UK at present, well over a third of most people's income is in some way or other going to eventually be paid in tax. It won't all be paid in income tax. Some will be paid in national insurance. Some will be paid in VAT. Some in alcohol duties or tobacco duties or car duties or road fund licenses or whatever else it might be. But ultimately, significant amounts of money are going to be paid in tax. And because trade gives rise to tax liabilities, those undertaking trade in the UK will always use the pound as their chosen instrument for trading, because they don't want to take the exchange risk of waiting with dollars or whatever it might be to not know what those dollars or whatever else they might be will be worth on the day when they have to pay their tax, and therefore they will trade using.
Rejoice, comrades, it's the Morton is here. Modern monetary theory, because this girl needs some education so I can actually contribute a bit more when in either Kev or Helena's chat. And it's always good to learn about these kind of things to see how Rachel's going to fuck us all over.
Pounds, because that way they minimise their exchange risk.
Hi, Morton.
But that means that by requiring that tax be paid, the government forces its currency into use in the economy so that people use it. As a corollary, the government gets control of the economy by having management of the currency. This is fundamental to macroeconomic control of an economy by a government, and MMT is the only economic theory that really has an explanation of how that value is created. Once
Cool.
those roles of tax have been fulfilled, then tax can have other roles. It can, for example, deliver economic, social, regulatory, and inequality agendas on behalf of the government. And that is something that every government around the world usually wants to undertake. They wish to promote some activities, they wish to discourage others, and tax is incredibly useful for that. But what I stress is that that is a further role of tax which has nothing to do with revenue raising. It has everything to do with supporting
I
other
feel for you,
government agendas, which is a quite
As you
different
can tell,
objective.
I'm not a
And
big
this
fan of
has to be
bourgeois.
fully understood. But it does make tax one of the most powerful instruments.
We've got other providers as well. We've got Stagecoach and we've got McGill's, which is a local one. It's older than First. Stagecoach is one of the older companies in Scotland. We've got other ones that go to the I don't know, up there, Stop Hill, one of the hospitals I go to, and the 90 that I get, which I'll be getting in the morning, is taking me to my doctor's, my GP practice, for my appointment at 22:11. So it goes straight down onto Alexandra. It goes past me, down past Springburn Academy, into Springburn, onto Springburn Road, and down round past the Royal onto Great Western Road to where I go to my GP practice. Oh, that's good. At least you can sideline first, because I just no. Plus, if you lose anything on a first bus, the depot that gets taken back to, the place it gets taken back to, is the other side of the river. So if I've got it, I think it does. So I would get one bus to get further down the street I live on, then get a 75, and it goes straight to it. It takes a while to get down yet. So 90. So from when I get on this bus, opposite a bingo, oddly enough, it usually takes about 40 minutes if the roads are decent, but if there's traffic or anything, it usually takes about 50 minutes. Centre of Glasgow is a one-way system, and during certain times of the day, it's difficult for anyone to fucking navigate. Even though there is bus gates, there's streets that are only allowed for buses. Still takes you a while to get from the top half of the city centre down to the bottom. Ray Joyce Comrades, Red Jester production this year. Hi, Jester. You're the first American in. Hi. Mwah. Yeah, first, one of the largest ones in the UK. Stagecoach, they're slightly smaller than First here in Glasgow. They're bigger on the East Coast where they started, like the Kingdom of Five, my home city of Perth, and up to Aberdeen and stuff. They provide better. Everyone's turning up. Rejoice, comrades! Mobius is here. Hi, Mobius. Welcome. I've been meaning to bend your ear. Mwah. Everyone, Mobius has a channel. He does gardening things. Don't suppose you know how to deal with clay. Mind you, in saying that, if I wanted to plant anything in this strip of grass, this strip of garden I've got, it's right on a main road. Don't think many plants would survive. Mind you, in saying that, I'd probably just plant root veg. See if I want to buy onions and leeks and tatties and stuff. Well, mind you, in saying that, buying tatties is relatively cheap.
For delivering policy by any government
Modern monetary
anywhere.
theory,
And in my
everyone,
opinion,
to educate
MMT
citizens.
explains this. So what else does MMT say? Most importantly, what it says is that if the situation that I have described exists, then the government does not need to balance its income and expenditure. In fact, what it also says that in most situations, that balance would be thoroughly undesirable. For example, if the government has a growing economy, a modest but controlled inflation, then the expansion of its money supply is essential. And that expansion of the money supply is best delivered by running government deficits. It follows, like night does day, that this is what a government should do to make sure there is sufficient money in existence to let the economy grow. But that shortfall is not something that creates a risk to the economy as a whole. In fact, it is essential.
I missed you there. Rejoice, comrades, the resident philosopher is here. Hi, Scribby. Welcome, welcome. Modern monetary theory, because this girl is educated on it, to be a little bit more, to elucidate more about monetary things. Got him. Hello, Scribby.
To ensure that there is cash in existence. What is more, there is no reason why the government then has to borrow any money back. It could just run an overdraft at the Bank of England or whatever its central bank might be if we're talking about another country, and that would meet the purpose just as well. In other words, a government in this situation never needs to borrow from financial markets. That is because a government of this sort can always borrow instead from its central bank. It has no dependency on financial markets as a consequence. For anyone to pretend that there is such a dependency is claiming a falsehood. It does not exist. And we know it doesn't. In the case of the UK, when we faced crises in 2008-9 and in 2020-21, the government created hundreds of billions of pounds of new cash to meet its own needs. It did it by effectively borrowing from its own central bank using the quantitative easing process, which does end up with this situation arising. And it did not need to go to the financial markets to say, please fund furlough or whatever else it might have been. That didn't happen. The government does not need to borrow from financial markets. But having said that, the government might well wish to offer a saving.
What are these people not getting? He said, there's the door, use it. We fucking used it. We have gone. That party isn't left. They are not left anymore, everyone, please. Anyone who still thinks that, please listen to me. They are not the left anymore. We'll be splitting fucking nothing. And as long as we get an electoral pact, a voting pact with if the new Corbyn Sultana party, if we get cooperation with them on where we can run, where we're most advantageous to get the seat, to get the constituency, that is doable. We can talk to the Greens about that. They can talk to the Greens about it. So please, people, the Labour aren't left anymore. That's ever since he took over in 2020, they're not the left. They've shaken us fleas off. So fuck them. Yeah. Trust me, a lot of SNP voters don't like Labour either. Trust us. We don't. So, nah. What? Don't get me wrong, they've made mistakes like any political party does, but they've actually made our country a little bit better. Baby boxes, free prescriptions, no tuition fees. Fan-fucking-tastic. Standing up for Palestine, and all that. By the way, you're going to be losing Stephen Flynn. It looks like he's going to be moving back up and running for Holyrood. He hasn't officially announced it, but I can feel it coming. Yeah, I have noticed that. If you find anyone and just bring them in, even just to watch my videos later during the day when I'm not streaming, I can explain how good they are and why they're good for Scotland. Many good policies they've done, obviously.
Facility to banks and to other financial institutions within the jurisdiction who wish to save with the safest institution that is available within the country as a whole, and that is the government. The government is always the safest place to save money in a country like the UK. And that's for one very simple, straightforward reason. The government always repay its debts. It is the one and only organisation that can do that. And as a consequence, large companies, banks, pension funds and others are very keen to save using government bonds because that is the one asset that they can rely upon to always be repaid when nothing else is guaranteed in that way, including, in their case, any deposits that they might hold.
That's why the financial markets wobbled because of her, Liz and Kwame, what they done. They thought, what the fuck are these two doing? Bank of England had to step in, mortgage rates went up, which hit my sister. It didn't hit my mum, she paid off her mortgage. Didn't hit me or my youngest sister. We were both renters, we both essentially council tenants. So, so my middle sister's mortgage went up by a few points. She was not very pleased. Like, why would you care? You're in Devon. Maybe they need to talk to Damo. He's just in a bit from them.
At the bank, because only the first £85,000 of the sums that they hold on deposit are guaranteed, which in the case of many of these organisations will be a totally insignificant amount. Therefore, the government can and very often does provide this facility, but it has to be understood for what it is. It's a savings facility it is not in any shape or form a borrowing facility because it doesn't need to borrow from these organisations. It is providing them with a safe place to save. So, where are we? We have a government which is in the position to control inflation without the use of interest rates. We can instead use tax rates to control inflation, or we can vary the scale of the deficit because that stimulates or reduces the scale of economic activity, which in turn has a consequence for the level of inflation within it. And the government could also, if it wished, use credit controls to commercial bank lending to control inflation. But MMT does describe a situation where if inflation...
Is that a downstream? I might actually go and look for that and we can watch it. Because seeing people getting mad at Liz Truss is endlessly delightful, obviously. The woman is fucking idiotic. I'm so glad she's out of Parliament now, thank fuck. Did Kwame get voted out as well? Kwasi, not Kwame. Kwasi. Did he get voted out as well? Give me a minute. I will lose your chat for a second here, Mobius, but I'll be back in the chat in a second. Kwasi Kwarteng. No, Kwasi. Kwasi. Former Chancellor. Ha! Oh! He was the MP for Spelthorne. Sorry. Yes, and he got voted out last year. Bye, Kwasi. Let's see. What was he before he became... God, he went to Eton. Oh God, he wrote in Britannia Unchained. That should have been disqualifying straight away. Early life and education. Also, oh, he's from London. Right. Anybody Eton King's Scholars, Newcastle Scholarship Prize. Classics in history, at least it wasn't PPE. Economic history. He's a fucking economic historian. Early career. Financial analyst for JP Morgan Chase. What the fuck? So Britannia Unchained disqualifies him immediately in my eyes. An economic history from woman from the US. It's Mariana. So that was Anne. We'll go and there's another video from Richard next, then we'll go and look at downstream and we can figure out what one it is.
Inflation is a priority and inflation management is always a matter of concern in macroeconomic thinking. Then this can be delivered without the use of interest rates because MMT suggests that it would be wise to run a low effective interest rate policy within any economy. There are a number of reasons for doing so. Firstly, that of course minimizes the interest rate obligations that the government will incur by providing a savings facility to whoever uses its banking facilities. In other words, the interest paid on government bonds or on national savings and investments accounts will be reduced to the minimum possible, which the government would appreciate. Secondly, of course, to provide a low interest policy provides the best possible environment for investment because investment is not funded by savings, it is funded by borrowing, and if borrowing is cheap, the amount of money that will be invested in productive capital within an economy will rise, and the result is that we will get growth if that is the government's objective. So whether growth is the objective or not, low interest rate policies still pay. And third, having a policy which minimizes the interest rate paid within an economy reduces the amount of money that is reallocated upwards by the payment of interest on things like mortgages, and that reduces inequality, which must be a government goal in any sensible environment where an economic balance is sought as an outcome from macroeconomic policy. All of this then means that a government can have one other objective, and that is full employment. This is possible inside an MMT environment because what a government that is planning for inflation can do, which any government that is subscribing to MMT will be doing, will be to say that if there are underused resources within its economy, it can seek to put those resources to use without the risk of inflation arising. So if, for example, there are people who are underemployed or unemployed in the country, a government can pursue full employment, which would put those people to work in a way that could not create inflation because they are at present sitting out of work. Putting them to work cannot create inflation. But this policy, if properly understood within the context of MMT, is limited. It means that if there is no capacity to put extra resources to work and the government still tries to spend, it cannot achieve that objective unless one of two things happens. One would be inflation because it would bid up the price of labour or other assets, or alternatively it must increase taxation. Now, it doesn't increase taxation in that situation to actually raise revenue, and that is an incredibly important point to make. What it does do is increase taxation to make sure that these resources are not going to be bid for in the private sector because the state wants to use them in the public sector. And this, as a matter of fact, is another use for taxation. It effectively removes resources from use within the private sector so that the state may buy them at a reasonable price. And that is part of macroeconomic management because we know that the state and the private sector must work together to achieve all economic outputs, and therefore this balancing is essential. But it is a balancing act that has to be carefully planned to make sure that inflation does not result. There could be a guarantee of full employment within an MMT economy. I am not wholly convinced that is necessary, nor do I see it as a necessary balancing act to say everybody must have work if they want it. I think that that is a desirable outcome.
There's some people who can't work. This wreck of a human. Like I keep on saying, I'd be an absolute fucking hazard in a workplace. It is not worth any employer, be it the public sector or private, having me as an employee. Really, really not worth it.
I don't see it as an essential outcome.
There's
I
always going to
will
be
differ
people
with some MMT
out with
economists
work.
on that point. They call this a job guarantee. I think it is something that a government may wish to do as a policy objective. I do not see it as core to MMT. Every single other thing that I have described within this video is, however, I think, core to MMT. Now, I am well aware that this has been quite a long and quite complicated video. There is a whole written version of this available as well, and we will provide the link below this video so you can download it from the Funding the Future website, because I have addressed this issue in several ways over quite a long period of time. But understanding MMT is really important if you are to get your head around the way in which the macro economy really works. There is nothing that I have said that is either particularly radical or unusual or even challengeable. In other words, this is the way that central banks agree that money works within the economy. This is the way that every economist of any repute now agrees that money is created. This is a way in which everybody knows inflation can be managed. It does challenge the idea of independent central banks and their control of inflation using interest rates, but that apart, MMT does very little which is radical or different or unusual. It is simply a form of post-Keynesian economics that says that with careful management of money, we can achieve the goal that any economy should try to fulfill. That is full employment. If ensuring that the well-being of people is delivered by guaranteeing them work to the greatest possible degree that a government can, and that becomes the aim of any government, then MMT makes sense for it to follow. If you want to run an economy without guaranteeing full employment, by all means, run the central bank using interest rates to control inflation and take the risk that there will always be unemployment as a buffer whilst it overheats or underheats the economy through the use of interest rate policy. But if people come first, so does MMT, and that is why it is so important.
Thank you, Richard. Yay! He makes it look, the way he explains it is fucking amazing. I can get through this. I'm more science, biology coded, let's put it that way. And the way he's explained that, they are brilliant for people with like me, the way I think. Thank you. I needed that. That was amazing. Thank you for introducing me to Richard Murphy, Lena. Much appreciated. Did everyone enjoy? Learning about these things, always good. Now there's another one from there's another video from him which is shorter, which is only a month old. So this should be quite good.
Hi, I'm Richard Murphy, and today is one of those days when we're going to try to answer one of the big questions in political economy. Tom's got the question. What are you going to ask me, Tom?
The question today is modern monetary theory, or MMT, the cure for global financial crises?
Lots of people have been asking us this question. It was very high on the list of those that people said they wanted us to address. So let's start by asking, what does modern monetary theory actually say? And I think that's really important, because if I don't define this, the rest of the answer makes no sense. Modern monetary theory, or MMT, describes how money really works in what is called a fiat currency economy. Now, a fiat currency economy is one where money is not backed by gold, silver, or any other asset, but is simply legal tender because the government says it is, and that's all there is to the money in the country in question. It's just a promise to pay from the government. In those situations, the government spends new money into existence. That new money is created for it by its central bank. In the case of the UK, the Bank of England. In the case of the USA, the Federal Reserve. And in the case of many European countries, the European Central Bank. But the point is that the money is simply created by that bank and spent by the government for the government to fulfill its obligations in the economy. And then the government taxes. But it doesn't tax to fund spending. As MMT explains, tax has the role of removing from the economy the money that was created to fund government spending, and the purpose of that is to control inflation, because otherwise there'd simply be too much money in circulation. But there's a critical point about this. MMT says that if you understand this, then the goal of the government when it comes to economic management is not to provide financial stability for the money that exists within the economy, because that money is created by the government in the first place. So it has the power to do that by implication of its control over the money supply. Instead, the role of the government is to create full employment and price stability, but not balanced budgets. In that case, what MMT is an economic explanation. But it isn't a political prescription. A lot of people somehow seem to think that modern monetary theory is some form of left-wing politics. But it isn't. It's just about an explanation of how money really works. It could be used just as much by a right-wing government as a left-wing government. It does allow a government to pursue a policy of full employment, but it doesn't require a government to do so. A government could pursue some other goal instead, like impoverishing everyone in the country to rules. Why it would want to do that, I don't know. But the point is, everything about policy is a choice. What MMT provides a government with is the opportunity for pursuing what I call active fiscal policy, which just means that it uses the combination of its spending and taxation and the difference between them, which is the deficit, to manage demand within the economy. As a consequence, it can also manage inflation. If the difference between spending and taxation is small, it is likely that inflation will be low. If it is large, it is likely that inflation will be higher. And If the difference between spending and taxation is small, there will be little stimulus effect with regard to increasing employment. But if employment does need to increase, then increasing spending in proportion to taxation provides the incentive to create more employment. And that should not, in that situation, create inflation. So this is a real economic tool. The contrast is with monetary policy, which uses interest rates to try to control inflation and at the same time help a government balance its budgets. Fiscal policy tends to have a bias towards the poorest in a community because if the government spends more money into the economy, the poorest tend to benefit most by securing employment or better benefits. In contrast, monetary policy tends to be biased towards the wealthiest because the poorest are the biggest borrowers and they pay more interest, whilst the wealthiest are the owners of the debt that the poor owe, and therefore they earn more if monetary policy is used to increase interest rates. When making the choice between these two policies, fiscal policy stands out as the more effective, and the reason why is straightforward. Fiscal policy can be put into place very quickly. Monetary policy takes up to 2 years to have an impact, by when very often the inflation which it is meant to be addressing has disappeared. So fiscal policy should be the government's preference because it is the best tool available to it. But that might require us, and I think MMT makes this clear, to rethink the role of some taxes. In particular, VAT, which tends to vary in rate very little under existing policy regimes, might have to vary quite a bit to be an instrument to deliver the immediate tax changes that MMT requires. MMT might also require some form of financial transaction tax, particularly on flows through the bank accounts of larger companies or maybe the wealthy. Basically, charging a tax on their use of money, if necessary to slow down the economy because there's a risk of inflation, or to eliminate that tax charge to encourage greater investment. But those options exist. It does require a different approach to taxation, and those tools are not there as yet, and I have to stress that's the case, but then that's because nobody's trying to seriously use MMT. So, is MMT a panacea? No, it clearly isn't. Modern monetary theory cannot fix every problem in an economy. For example, it wouldn't have prevented the inflation that happened after the invasion by Russia of Ukraine, because that was caused by an external source, and the panic in the financial markets about the restriction in the supply of oil and gas that might follow. There was no financial cure, monetary policy, fiscal policy, MMT, or anything else that could have dealt with that, except better regulation of the financial markets. But what MMT does offer is a more accurate understanding of how money works. And that is really seriously important, because that means it provides practical tools for managing economies in a way that is fairer and more effective. And that's why politicians have to understand MMT when far too few do. Thanks for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please do click the like and subscribe buttons because they do genuinely help us spread the word on YouTube. As importantly, could you have a look at the section below this video where it says more, and there you'll find a link to my blog. And if you follow that for the specific link to the blog entry related to this video, you'll find a transcript of this video and lots of other related material, plus a ChatGPT prompt that you could use to write a letter to your MP on the contents of this video, which will turn you into a campaigner, which will be a great thing to do. Finally, if you do appreciate the work we're doing, can you think about giving us a donation? If you'd like to do so, there's a link below, or you can find one on my blog where there's a Ko-fi button saying, please buy me a coffee. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you again soon.
Into a blind trust that pays out dividends and then
No. Rejoice, comrades. Elron Hobward has arrived. Hi, Elron. Business gets pinned. I like that pin. That looks good. Oh, we'll hear from her. Don't you worry, Elron. Right. I'll get back to that one from Helena soon. I think I found the downstream you're talking about. No, no, Nevada downstream. I was watching that Helena video earlier on, the one from the jury room, watching yep, watching her lose her shit. Well done, Elron. You get her. Over the next 4 years, I will be feeling for you. I don't see your MP surviving personally. Really, I don't. It was 10 months ago, so it's down a bit, down a bit, down a bit. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? 6 months, 8 months, we're getting closer. 9 months, 9 months. Carry on. Pester her. She deserves it. Is it that one, John? Thank you. To Abby.
Sometimes it feels like we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Yes, the 2008 global financial crisis utterly discredited the
Oh, it's
neoliberal
Stephanie
economic model.
Kelton.
Yes, we're staring down the barrel
Unlearning Economics has spoken to Stephanie as well. So she's in good Ash is in good company because Unlearning Economics has already spoken to Stephanie Kelton. That one's really good if you want to go and check him out. He's really quite good. Unseating. She attended that meeting and ooh. Yeah, whenever you see Rachel Reeves out and about, just go up and challenge her. She probably was. She probably was, which is kind of sickening, really. That means they're sycophants. Yeah. Don't get me. I've been called a sycophant before when I was I wasn't a member of the SNP, but I was very staunch SNP. I've been for years. But Marxists, but still voted for the SNP, lesser even all that fucking bollocks. Golly, I can't get to what's the CLP, let alone my squad. Cowards. Cowards. They're there to represent you. They're not meant to do shit like that. Oh, for fuck's sake. No surprise, really.
of a climate crisis which threatens our very existence. But the other side of the equation, what we're supposed to replace that neoliberal model with and how we're going to pay for decarbonisation, well, that just doesn't have the same consensus. Stephanie Kelton, an economist and former advisor for the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, argues that finding the money is actually
What's Rachel see? Duty-free support of no carbons efforts to steal carbons. Well, then, there's all the CLPs, but put pay to that. Cowards and sycophants. But if she, well, it used to leads west, right? Tonight's hydration of choice is tropical. I finished my lemon. I will not show the supermarket. Orange, lemon, and pineapple. I like tropical flavours. And this is the first for me, quadruple concentrated. Never seen that before. Robinson's is double or triple concentrate. I love their fruit creation ones. They're really tasty, but they're a bit expensive. And Doo-doo-doo. Damn it. Go on. Oh, there it is. Oh, dear God. Don't know if you can make them out. The Minotaur. Ariadne. I think that one's evident. I got 99 problems and I caused all of them because raccoon. Artemis. And Athena. All of them. Oh, Pan. You got Arcee after her produced one body and started recording back. Nice one, everyone. Allerton. Is an entire branch for passing down now. This is Northwoods Wells. Gossamer Island multiplying several sections 39 assaults. No. I don't want to clear protection. Go back to my chat. Gossamer Island section 39 assaults and all the attacking. Oh, don't worry about caps locks. I've allowed caps so people can see what's happening. Don't worry, Elron. For something that is emotive as this, and vital, obviously, you could use this as evidence that you're educating people about your situation, which is good. Carry on, Ash.
The easy part. She's a proponent of modern monetary theory, a set of ideas which turns fiscal assumptions on their heads, and has also invited criticism from both the left and the right. You lot have been asking for an MMT downstream for ages, so here it is. And if you want to find out more about Stephanie Kelton's ideas, she's got a book called The Deficit Myth and is the subject of a new documentary called Finding the Money. There's a link to it in the description. I hope you enjoy this interview.
That is a hate crime. That is a hate crime. That adds on. So yeah, hate crime. It's also a hate crime up here. You're not allowed to discriminate against disability. So do not come at me. Plus, I know kendo and fencing. I can use my walking stick in other ways other than supporting me. No violence. Mm-mm. Nice one. Keep us posted, Elron, if you want to, of course. You don't need to divulge any sensitive information, obviously. Take it away, Ash and Stephanie.
Stephanie Kelton, welcome to Downstream. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, I guess my first question is this. Could you explain to me, for the completely uninitiated, what MMT is? And please bear in mind, you're talking to a literature graduate, so write in Comic Sans if you have to.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do this the way that you asked me to do it, but I feel a sense of obligation to the many people who developed the writing and the scholarship that over now almost 30 years has been dubbed MMT. So it really is a very big project that a number of us started contributing to 25, 30 years ago, thinking about the monetary system and what it is that we have today in the form of a fiat currency, which is basically saying, we don't have a currency in the UK, the pound, in the US, the dollar, in Australia, the Australian dollar, in Japan, the yen. These are fiat currencies with a flexible exchange rate, meaning we're not on a gold standard or some other monetary system where the government pledges to convert the currency into something it could run out of, gold or silver or another country's currency. And so MMT is really about interrogating this question, like what has changed? What changes when you have a floating exchange rate and a fiat currency? What are the policy options that are available that we think are unavailable to us because we're very often trapped in this old way of thinking about how the currency works? And what MMT is doing is saying, let's recognize that we have this sort of degree of freedom available to us because of the monetary system we have today. And we're not really taking full advantage of the policy options that are available to us. I'll give you just one example: full employment. We tend to run economic policy as if we're in some ways still constrained by the need to.
Like I said, the first time I saw her was when she was talking to Unlearning Economics. She's brilliant. I love Stephanie. And she explains it just as well as Richard Murphy does. Wolf's probably done it at some point as well. Probably.
Find the money. It's almost like, how are you going to pay for everything? Where will you find the money to do this? Has this sort of gold standard aura about it, as if you really have to go out and find gold or something in order to be able to pay for education or healthcare or infrastructure, or deal with climate. And MMT is trying to clear sort of the fog and bring us to the modern era where we recognize that we're not on a gold standard. The money system we have today allows us to spend more freely, but the thing you have to watch out for is inflation. And so it really does shift the entire debate away from worrying about things like running out of money, bankrupting the country, and so forth, and get us focused on our real capacity to build infrastructure or deliver healthcare services or combat climate change or whatever, in a way where we have a proper debate instead of these distracting debates that have really hampered, I think, policymaking for most of my adult life.
I mean, so if I understand you correctly, is the argument from MMT that currency can be issued basically without limit by central banks? The only thing you have to worry about is inflation, and within the framework of MMT, taxation becomes a way of managing inflation because it takes money out of circulation. Is that the argument?
Well, bits and pieces of that, yes, but it's really it's complicated, right? And so let's kind of try to unpack that. You said, can the government spend without limit or something along those lines? It can't spend without
issue currency.
So, well, you can't issue currency without limit. You have the capacity to issue currency, in a sense, up to whatever Parliament, or in the US, whatever Congress decides. There's no inherent constraint on the ability of the government to commit to spending money and then to have those dollars or pounds get spent, because the government is the issuer of the currency. It can authorize spending in effectively any amount, any dollar or pound size budget it chooses. But the limit you rightly then pointed to is inflation. So there is a constraint. You can't run out of money, but you can run out of things to buy. And that's a real hard constraint, is the capacity of the economy to safely absorb that spending. And if there isn't sufficient capacity to safely absorb the spending, then you will get inflationary problems. And then you
Ding, 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 ding. Correct, everyone. Yeah, that's basically what the bank bailouts were, because of the subprime, the financial markets being bastards, essentially. So yeah. Ah, much better. My right knee is still giving me a lot of problems. Urgh, this is a menace.
you pointed to taxation, which is one way.
They can borrow from the central bank to fund anything they fucking want, including stopping using fossil fuels and ramping up renewables. Tidal, I will endlessly scream that into the fucking void until someone starts listening to me. Look at Orkney, for fuck's sake. Tidal, people. Tidal. And you can put, there's places on Rannoch Moor up in my home shire in Perthshire. There's places on Rannoch Moor that you can put wind turbines as well. More wind, essentially, as well. That would help. We can't do more hydro up here. We've basically tapped that resource. But anyway, we're producing 110% over the electricity needs. We're selling the excess to Norway, for crying out loud.
To sort of calibrate what it is the government is trying to do, so that if the government just said, listen, we're never going to collect tax, we're not going to increase tax ever again, we're just going to leave tax, the tax code as it is today, and we're just going to spend freely from here on out, never worry about changing tax levels or anything, you would get an inflation problem, right? And you said taxes, one important thing they do is that they remove dollars or pounds, they take purchasing power away from someone. So it is important in some sense to regulate how much the government is spending relative to how much it's taking away from the rest of us, so that it avoids the problem of inflation by pushing too much money into our hands without removing enough, but also that it avoids unemployment, where it is the opposite problem. It's not putting enough in relative to how much it's taking away from the rest of us. So there is a balance that needs to be struck with the dual goals of achieving full employment, but also low inflation.
One of the major themes of Finding the Money, which is the film that you've recently made expressing many of these arguments, is climate change and the need to build green infrastructure, decarbonising infrastructure very, very quickly. How does modern monetary theory relate to climate change in your view?
Well, it's one of many policy challenges that you can address in part through government policy, committing to spending, making the investments that would be necessary to deal with mitigation and adaptation around climate change. So if you recognize that the public sector has a very important role to play, then the first question anyone asks is obviously, how are you going to pay for those investments that you want to make around adaptation, mitigation, dealing with the impacts of climate change? So the public sector has an important role to play. They've got a budget for the investments that they want to make to tackle climate change. Here in the US, Congress passed what to date has been the most ambitious climate change policy, and that's in the form of this so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is really a big climate bill. And that was Congress committing hundreds of billions of dollars and saying, we're going to put money behind this effort, and we want to see greening of the economy and investments in all kinds of ways to deal with climate change. So what does MMT have to teach? Well, first, that the public purse can be tapped as Congress or Parliament chooses, and it can supply whatever funding is deemed necessary without worrying about running out of money, how to pay for it, finding the money. So MMT is helpful in letting us know that the money can always be made available to deal with climate change, and that the thing you have to watch out for when you're pushing hundreds of billions or trillions into this is managing inflationary pressures along the way.
So I suppose when I was watching the film, I was like, I'm arm in arm with you when you're saying things like a national budget is not like a household budget,
Yep.
right? Household budget can run out of money. A nation can't, because it's not going to run out of people, essentially, right? That's why nations can't run out of money. It means that nations have a lot more autonomy over the pace at which they pay back debts. A nation may not ever become debt-free, and these are all ways in which nations are different from households. The bit where I suppose I became a little bit more confused is that deficits don't matter in and of themselves. Inflation matters, but deficits don't matter. I understand that in different circumstances, what's considered to be an acceptable debt to GDP ratio, that changes. But I think that lots of people would find the idea that deficits don't matter very challenging to how they've been taught to think about economics.
Well, okay, so a few things. Like, first, I would say I have never argued, and I don't believe anyone in MMT, in the scholarly community, has ever argued that deficits don't matter. Okay, that's become sort of a weird label of MMT, that we're somehow this school of thought or the approach that argues that deficits don't matter. That's not true at all. What we argue is that deficits matter, but not the way that we've been taught to believe that they matter. So people have argued that, for example, a government deficit is de facto, just on its face, evidence that the government is mismanaging its finances, that's doing something wrong, that there's this idea that the budget should be in balance. And if it's not either balanced or in surplus, something's gone wrong. Why would the government's budget land in a deficit? That's just showing you the government is behaving irresponsibly. And so MMT is saying, no, that's not the case at all. Every deficit is good for someone. Recognize that up front. So people hear this word deficit and it has a negative connotation. We've been taught and trained and conditioned to hear that word and to have an adverse reaction. Deficit, that's bad, right? It's very hard to imagine finding a way to use the word deficit in a sentence where it's a good outcome, right?
Oh.
No, deficit is just sort of inherently bad.
Rejoice, comrades! Red Rust is here. Hi, Red. Go and check out Red Rust 308 for chill gaming vibes and music. Red Rust is amazing. Hello, hello. Mwah. Welcome in. Am I sounding good? Is Stephanie sounding good? This is Novara Downstream. She is an author and economist, and she's teaching us about modern monetary theory because this girl needs education. Sounding great. Mwah. Redrust is brilliant. Very chill vibes. How goes the oxygening?
You're watching your favorite sports team and it's a football game and you hear the announcer come on and say, if Liverpool's going to come back and win this game, they're going to have to overcome a 2-point deficit. I mean, deficit, right? 2-goal deficit. Bad. What MMT says is, okay, hold on. The budget outcome, whether it's a surplus, balanced budget, or a deficit, is not inherently telling you anything important. Okay? What is this thing we call the deficit? What is a government deficit? What does it tell us? The difference between two numbers. That's what it is, right? The first number is outlays. It's how many pounds or how many dollars the government puts into our hands each year, the first number. The second number is how many pounds or dollars they remove from our hands each year, mostly through taxation. So if someone were to tell you that the government is putting more pounds into your hands, collectively, the people, than it is taking away, would you have a negative reaction to that? Or would you look at it and say, oh, they're making a contribution to the rest of the economy? If they add more than they subtract, what they're really doing is generating a surplus, right? If they put 5 in and only take 3 out, what they're really doing is depositing 2 into some other part of the economy. So the government's deficit is equally a surplus when viewed from a different perspective. Every deficit is good for someone. You all over there have been talking for weeks about a $22 billion fiscal hole, right? Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a horrible medical condition when you put it that way, but yes.
Yeah. So there's this huge obsession, media obsession, the politicians, the public, everybody has been sort of focused on this idea.
Well, Stephanie's just said that. Yeah, it's managed to basically blind us to how this actually works. That's why people like Stephanie Kelton, Richard J. Murphy, the British version of her, and Richard Wolff, him, he everywhere. You can see Richard everywhere. And another UK streamer called Unlearning Economics. He's amazing. He has spoken to Stephanie as well and saying, no, no. So they borrow from itself, they borrow from the central bank to decarbon, more tidal, please, more wind farms, build council housing, so social rents, make better transport, don't raise the price of bus travel to £3 minimum. That fuck off. That'll hit people like, well, not me, but working class people in the pocket. And you don't want, we buy shit. We need stuff to survive. We pay our bills. And if you give us the money, it'll go to whoever the top 1-2% is, and you tax them. Like we've got a higher income tax rate here in Scotland. They were all freaking out about it for a couple of weeks, but then things started to change here in Scotland, which is good because it's still an income tax. It's still taxing people who are workers essentially, but it's the ones who earn more. It's 46p, so that kicks in 120,000, I think. They've still got their tax allowance. I don't know what they're fucking moaning about. And it gets taxed 1p more, and that stays in Scotland, and we can fund everything. So I don't know what they were moaning about. It worked. It only went up by 1 fucking pence. I personally would want it a little bit higher than that, maybe 50 pence. But and they were, oh, the British income tax. And I'd rather they institute a fucking wealth tax, really, or an asset tax. That would bring in billions.
idea that there is a $22 billion shortfall, a hole, that something's gone wrong, that there's something that needs to be repaired or fixed or mended. And what I'm sitting here explaining to you is that this thing that we call the government deficit is our surplus. It is just by definition, by math, by accounting, it is always the case that if the government's budget is in deficit, that there is a financial surplus on the other side of the equation. And that financial surplus exists only because the government is putting in more than it's taking out. In other words, it is running a fiscal deficit. And so we've got to reframe and relabel and rethink this whole notion of what it means to have the government's budget not in balance, and how we understand the role of the government's deficit on our side of the ledger.
I mean, so to think about what's happening on that other side of the ledger for a moment. For me, there's a very big difference between, are we running a deficit because we've borrowed to invest in our national health service, right? Something which makes us all healthier, happier people. Or is it because Prime Minister Liz Truss has decided she wants to borrow in order to pay for tax cuts for the very wealthy? Yep. There's a difference between paying to renationalize, for instance, the railways or parts of the energy sector versus, handing out billions of pounds to the likes of McKinsey and Deloitte. So one of the things I guess I'm asking is,
I'd want that it's publicly owned, the water system, the water up here in Scotland is in public hands, it's nationalised up here. I want the same for England and Wales. Just look at the fucking mess. Literally. Yeah. Wait until their franchise is up and just don't renew it. Till whatever train fucking rule it is. Nope, we're not you're not getting the franchise again, piss off. Go away. So, and Super Hubby's explained to me they can't do that with the water. I said, what about the shareholders? Fuck them. Don't care. It's a natural monopoly that shouldn't be in fucking private hands. 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. That is that's what we need. So 3 minutes, really, 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, and 3 days without food. So in my opinion, like obviously we're not getting taxed for breathing yet, but the other two are, especially the water, that's in private hands in England and Wales. No. It's not human right, it's a human fucking need. We need water. Shouldn't be in private hands, should be in public hands and maintained a hell of a better than it is in England and Wales.
How important to you is where that public money is going on the other side of the ledger? To what extent it's in public hands or in very, very elite private ones?
Very important, right? So the first step, I think of this in sort of stages, because we have to deprogram people. We have to get them first over the hurdle, which is, I don't want the government ever to run a deficit. So the previous response that I gave you was about overcoming that first hurdle, right? Thinking of the government's deficit as our collective financial surplus. Every deficit is good for someone. And you're taking me right to where I want to be and where the rubber meets the road, which is, if I say every deficit is good for someone, you're saying, okay, but for whom? And for what? And that's everything, right? But you can't get to that part of the debate and discussion, at least in my mind, without first coming to terms with the fact that it's okay for the government's budget to be in deficit. In fact, it's probably more than okay in the US context and in the UK. It's necessary. We
Exactly.
need the government's budget to.
Exactly. That is ghoulish fucking behaviour what Nestle are doing. Ghoulish. So yeah, boo Nestle. Boo.
The budget outcome to be a deficit. So now we have a real conversation, which is, okay, who are those deficits serving? Are we running deficits to, as you suggested, create a huge windfall for people who are already doing phenomenally well? Tax cuts aimed at the biggest, wealthiest corporations or the wealthiest people in society. That will benefit them. Those deficits will produce surpluses for those folks, no question about it. But will it trickle down? Will it benefit broader society? Will it improve life for working people and the rest of it? And we've got 40 years. We've run this experiment. The results are in, and we know that it does not work. So now the question becomes, what kinds of deficits can deliver outcomes that lift people up, that produce better health outcomes, that tackle climate, that give us better, more affordable education, that deal with the real deficits in our economy, infrastructure, education, health.
TikTok? Doubtful. Oh, it's been proven, no, the trickle-down economics, fuck off, Reagan and Thatcher, you pair of ghouls. I hope you are burning. Dude, what? No, Maggie. Ha, 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 ha.
And the like. So every deficit is good for someone. First, you got to get over this aversion to having the government in deficit. Then once you get there, you say, all right, so we're going to have deficits, but deficits for whom and for what? And that's where the real debate needs to take place.
I like that one.
I suppose if I was to play devil's advocate and pretend to be one of Rachel Reeves's advisors, I mean, what a world that would be. But let's say I'm one of Rachel Reeves's advisors,
Yes, it
and
is.
we've had a high-level meeting at the Treasury, and I turn around and I say to you, well, it doesn't really matter what I think about running deficits. It doesn't matter what you think about running deficits. What matters is the market and being disciplined by the market, because ultimately the
people like us
UK
need
is
it more.
reliant on
They don't.
imports. We import
got
more than we export. We need the pound to be strong against the dollar. So the minute that goes the wrong way, like it did for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, we have an economic crisis and we have a political crisis because of it. So what's your response to, I guess, that rebuttal, the idea that it just...
Shortest serving Prime Minister ever. There is 3 different the number of days. I will go with the highest one because even at that, it's still blindingly short. 49 days as Prime Minister. Well done, lettuce lady. Money does so crazy coming out, isn't it? Yeah. Well said, Elron. Yes. Oh, that's an unfortunate pause face. Sorry, Ash.
It doesn't really matter what we think about deficits. It matters what markets think.
Well, I'm not going to say that markets are wholly irrelevant, but I will say that the UK, like so many other currency issuing governments, can survive quite well in the face of a currency that experiences depreciation, volatility. Australia has a currency that goes up and down. Japan has a currency that goes up and down vis-a-vis the dollar. And yet their governments pursue their independent macroeconomic policies without having to worry about market discipline per se. So look, I'll say with what happened to Liz Truss, I think has become a huge barrier in the thinking of the current government, that somehow if they try to take independent action to do something bold, that maybe isn't fully costed, that increases deficits, that they're going to experience the kind of backlash from financial markets that people think, came in and
Rejoice, comrades. Malky is here. Hi, Malky. Welcome, welcome. Great to see you.
said to Truss, oh, no, you don't. We won't allow you to carry out this set of, proposals that you wanted. And somehow that leaves you incapable of taking independent policy action. I don't think that's what happened at all with the Truss government. I think that what happened is she didn't have the support of backbenchers. She didn't get her ducks in a row before announcing this agenda. I think markets rightly perceived the agenda would be inflationary. I think that the reaction was these policies are likely to push up inflation at a moment when inflation is already high. The central bank, the Bank of England, is going to respond to an increase in inflation by raising interest rates. And based on, this gets a little bit wonky, but this is financial markets trying to read what the central bank will do. In other words, interpret their reaction function. And they said, okay, we think it's going to be inflationary, rates are going to go up. And so we're going to try to move out of the pound. And then you had the problems, of course, with the pension funds, which the Bank of England eventually did rescue. But I don't think that what happened is that markets were saying no to Liz Truss. I think markets were saying, Liz, this is probably going to be inflationary. The central bank is probably going to respond in this way. We're going to place our bets accordingly. And we don't think you have the strength from within your own party, and you don't have the Bank of England behind you. And so markets moved the pound down and yields up. And then you were through it in a matter of a short period of time because the Bank of England stepped in, took care of the pensions, but this was a political problem. This is not something that you have to worry about if you have the will to stand up to the central bank and to insist that you're going to move forward with your policy proposals. And if yields move up, it's not like you can't afford to carry out the agenda, even in the face of, rising interest rates. We did that here.
I mean, just to go back to Rachel Reeves and the missing 22 billion. I mean, if you were in charge of her economic policy and her response to the 22 billion specifically, what would you be advising instead?
Well, the point is there's nothing missing. It's there. It's on the non-government's balance sheet. That's where a government deficit goes, quote unquote, is it goes to the non-government part of the economy. There's nothing missing. Anyone who's ever dug a hole before knows that if you get a shovel and you start digging into the earth, you can dig a hole, but the dirt has to go somewhere. It piles up somewhere else. It's exactly the same thing with a government deficit. If there's a $22 billion deficit registered on the government's ledger, exactly, then there is a $22 billion surplus.
Correct. Got stolen, essentially. Tax the bastards that got it. That's how you get it. You don't tax us. You don't raise fucking prices on things. You don't take away vital benefits from granny. And you don't come after people like me. We're already on the. Well, I'm different. I've got more money now from the Scottish Government than I did from the Department of Work and Pensions. You do not take it from granny or blind wheelchair users protesting either. You don't take it from the most poverty-stricken parts of the economy, parts of society. You go after the brick makers. Tax them to get that money back, not us. Don't cut fucking benefits.
surplus on the non-government ledger. It's not that it's missing. We know where it is. It's that there's an unhealthy obsession with the budget outcome, the idea that the government's budget is supposed to be balanced. It isn't. The economy is supposed to be balanced, not the government's budget. Okay? That's the problem, is that we have governments that get obsessed with the budget outcome instead of recognizing that there's nothing inherently wrong with having governments spend more than they collect in tax, that is to have their budget in deficit, if the broader economy is balanced. If you have full employment and low inflation, the number that pops out of the budget box at the end of the year, who cares, right? Keep your eye on the prize. The real economy is what matters. And if you can achieve the outcomes, whether it's investments in health or education or climate or the rest of it, and you can keep inflation low, right, while doing those things, I don't care what number pops out of the budget box. I don't care if it's a small deficit, a medium-sized deficit, a relatively large deficit, a balanced budget, a surplus. What matters are the real outcomes, not the arbitrary number that falls out of the budget box.
One of the things that you hear a lot from supporters of MMT is that when it comes to things like war, military aid, somehow the government always finds the money.
Mm-hmm.
The quibbling over affordability, that happens when you talk about hospitals, when you talk about decarbonisation, when you talk about housing.
Yep.
And I was thinking about this and I was reflecting on it because it's something which instinctively I agree with. I go,
Well
yeah,
said,
it's
Redcliffe.
really, really true. But if I was a member of, the international financial elite, I work out of Wall Street and I've got homes everywhere and I've got a model wife and a million mistresses, I would say, well, hang on, there is a bit of a difference to me between building a hospital or ending homelessness and, buying more cruise missiles or building an aircraft carrier, because one of those things preserves America's status in the world. It makes America, it puts America at the very top of the geopolitical order and makes it much more difficult for America to be disciplined either by other countries or by market forces in the way that other economies and other countries are. So it's this idea of you can run a big deficit. What matters is the real economy, and you can absorb, I guess, like some degree of fluctuation from the markets. Does that maybe work better in an American context than it does for other countries, which either rely a lot more on importing goods and having to buy?
Rejoice, comrades. Jacqueline is here. Hi, Jacqueline, darling. Mwah. Great to see you. You just woke up. Welcome. Ash, who you probably recognise, Stephanie Kelton, talking about MMT to educate this person. I need to know more. Welcome.
Things using the dollar or don't have the same geopolitical status as the United States does.
I will readily agree that the U.S. is in a unique position by virtue of the fact that essentially the entire world is willing to work and produce in order to get the U.S. dollar. No question. And when I say, what does MMT teach us? One thing is that a currency issuing government, whether you're the UK, the US, Australia, Japan, China, whatever, you can afford to buy whatever is available and for sale in your own currency. Okay, that is, in a sense, the limit. What is available and for sale in your currency? The US has the entire global marketplace because everybody's willing to work and produce to get the dollar. But does that mean that MMT only, in a sense, works for the US because of its reserve currency status? No, of course not. I mean, I can't count the number of times articles have been written over the decades pointing to a country like Japan, right? Is Japan a poster child for MMT or something like that? But it's not just the US, it's not just Japan. Look, when COVID hit, what did countries around the world do? They massively spent to address the pandemic and the weak economies and so forth. Some spent more than others. Some did very bold, ambitious fiscal, but others, did more modest. But everybody spent a lot of money, and including countries that were told, you have a fiscal crisis, you won't be able to borrow, you have to get your fiscal house in order, there's no fiscal space and all that. Then COVID comes along, and all of a sudden it reveals the spending capacity of the UK, of even European countries, as long as the ECB was there to backstop them, of Australia, of Korea, of China, of Japan. I mean, everybody spent a lot of money. And the reason that they could do it is because they can issue their currency and they are able to buy whatever's available and for sale in their currency. So are there countries that are more vulnerable to a depreciation if their currency gets weak and they have to import goods like food, medicine, energy, technologies, and you have a sharp depreciation in your currency and you're dependent upon the rest of the world for those critical imports, then you're going to pay more for those things. Doesn't mean you can't get them.
Yeah, the pandemic proved that. You can literally house the people. It is possible. Yeah. So the fact that people are now back on the streets, fucking sickening, really. We know you can do it. Even before the pandemic, people were saying this. You can do this. You can find homes for these people. But no, we've backslid. We can do this. We're a fiat currency, for fuck's sake. I sounded really Scottish there. We can build houses for these people. We can put them. We can put them in houses. We can get training for them if they're able to work. We can go. You can put them into training. They can become. They can go into the economy like that. But getting people off the streets, housing is a human right, for crying out loud. Yeah, yeah. But that'll make the house prices go down. Fuck, shut it. If you've got more than the house that you currently live in, you're a parasite.
But it may mean that you're going to acquire them only at higher and higher prices, and that could be inflationary. Yes, that is something that we have long recognized in MMT, is that it is better to be energy independent or to have sovereignty in food, in energy, in medicines, and technologies that better protects you from the risk of exchange rate fluctuations and your ability to run your domestic policy, full employment, price stability, without having to be fearful of not being able to acquire needed imports or only at higher prices. So it's a much more complex thing than just saying, because you have your own currency, you can have everything. We don't promise anything like that.
I mean, listening to you speak, it seems like we're in agreement on a lot of things, right? We're in agreement on the need to invest in the productive parts of the economy, to mitigate our reliance on the finance sector. We're in agreement about the role of I guess, American supremacy and the sort of freedoms that allows America. I wonder then, are our differences then merely semantic? The fact that I will talk about taxing the rich in order to pay for something, and in your view, that is discursively unhelpful because it obscures the role that central banks play in creating the money, essentially, and that the money's already there.
I would say it differently. I think that it's unhelpful because it's unhealthy to center the rich in our collective pursuit of well-being. That when people do this thing and they say, well, look, I just woke up this morning to headlines that the Labor Party is scrapping Now you can correct me because you're closer to these issues than I am. But when I woke up this morning, I saw headlines that said the Labor Party is backing away from 3 tenets of its proposed revenue raising, right? It was going to close tax loopholes. It was going to go after the rich in these various ways. And now the party has decided, actually, no, we can't do those things. So as they back away from these pledges to go after revenue by taxing the rich, it robs them of the money they think they need to hire more nurses and more teachers and to do all of these other things. So what I'm saying is, what MMT is showing us, teaching, is to say you don't need the rich or anyone else, and you don't need the revenue from higher taxes in order to, quote, pay for the spending that you want to do. And if you believe that you do, and you do as the Labor government has been attempting to do, which is to lay out a plan and say, we want to spend this much money, and here's how we're going to pay for it. We're going to get revenue from all of these tax increases, and you match it up, and it's all paid for, and it won't increase the deficit. What I've always believed is, first, that's unhealthy to center the rich in that way, and to say the only way we're going to move forward on these spending priorities to invest in people, in the health system and education and so forth, is if we can successfully claw enough money away from the rich. And once we get that revenue, then we'll have the money to be able to start tackling these other problems. I think that's a problem. We've just seen why it's a problem. It doesn't work. The votes aren't there. You don't have the political support to do it. So now what? All of these other priorities just fall by the wayside because you don't have the political will to tax the rich. I think that's a big political problem, is that it tends not to work. And it didn't work here in the US either when the Biden administration wanted to do its Build Back Better agenda. And President Biden said, I don't want to add to the deficit, so we're going to pay for all of this. We're going to have child care and elder care. We're going to have a care economy plus infrastructure and climate and all the rest of it. And because I don't want to add to the deficit, we're going to get all the revenue from raising taxes on corporations and wealthier people. And the votes weren't there. Even Democrats wouldn't vote for it. So all of those care priorities fell by the wayside because we couldn't muster the strength to do it. This is a really important one because people will often say MMT is somehow like a permission slip to not tax the rich. And that's not it at all. Okay, what we don't want is to say that we won't move forward on important priorities, investing in health and education, in climate. What we don't want is to say we're not going to be able to move on any of those objectives unless and until we can get the money from the wealthy to pay for it all. That's what we want to do. We want to break that link and almost create 2 separate fights. Okay, inequality, wealth, income inequality has grown to such an extreme. It is so unequal that it's unhealthy, not just for the functioning of our economy, but for the functioning of our democracies. We need to rebalance the distribution of wealth and income and power and the power that goes with it. So absolutely have that fight. Close tax loopholes. Go after people who abuse the tax system, change tax rates in ways that you think will make the tax code more fair and equitable and deliver better outcomes and all that. Have that fight, but don't bind other priorities to your success or failure on that front, because if you can't get where you're trying to get on the tax fight, if you can't get all the revenue that all of the tax increases would generate, and then you can't say, okay, well, I've paid for everything, so now we can make.
Yes, Jacqueline, most of them. And they've all got carved outs for playing on the markets as well, which is fucking mental. Correct, Red Rust. Bribing. Whenever I can, I don't call it lobbying. It's bribing. It is bribery, which essentially is a crime under most legal codes. Corporate personhood. What the fuck? Yeah, that case, that fucking infuriated me. What the hell? I will not say how much. Obviously. Entirely between me and my bank and Super Hubby. I'm rich. It won't last long.
Make the investments in health and education, then what's very likely to happen is that you won't ever tackle those other problems because you'll find that it was just politically not possible, that the votes weren't there and you didn't have the political will to push up the taxes. And so you said, well, then I guess we have to abandon everything else. And what MMT is trying to say is have those fights, but separate them. Don't bind them together so that the only way you allow yourself to move forward with the spending proposals is if you can be successful on the tax front. I would still, as an MMT economist, I would still object to framing things in a way that says, the revenue that government collects from us is used to pay for X, Y, and Z. Because I know as an economist and someone who understands the monetary system and the operations, I know that's not how it works. So the academic side of me would still kind of grit my teeth and go, yeah, I don't want to say that because I know that's not how it works. But I might be, sort of quiet about my objection if I thought that in spite of the fact that it's misleading, at least it's going to help get us to the place where we all want to be, which is, better investments in education and health and tackling climate and so forth. I could grit my teeth and say, all right, let them pretend that the rich are going to pay for everything. And as long as we get the investments, I'll just, be quiet about it. My frustration is that I've lived long enough and watched these efforts to know that it doesn't work. It just politically, it has not borne fruit. And that's why I'm so insistent that we separate these fights, because I have, for too many years, watched the progressive agenda fall by the wayside because of the insistence that you have to be fiscally responsible and play along with the pay for game and, say, well, we'll get all the money. We'll just get it from the rich people. And there we go. We'll pay for everything. And I've just watched it fail over and over and over again.
So I suppose my provocation would be this, which is, listening to that, it maybe seems like an attempt to deal with a political problem, which is the weakening of class politics. So not the weakening of class inequality, that's become stronger, but the weakening of class consciousness and a explicitness about class in politics. And so MMT sort of says, okay, well we'll deal with that by making it as scary as a spreadsheet. So we're not going to be talking about the where the compromise between labor and capital is. We're not going to be talking about attacking concentrations of wealth. We're not going to be talking about a parasitic class of rentiers.
Yeah, I'm more worried about them buying everything than paying for everything. Yeah, we don't want them to buy anymore. We don't. So we tax them so they can't buy more. Is what I'm thinking, and I think that's how we can use MMT. Obviously, I believe if I've got that right from Richard. Tax the bastards, then fund what the country needs. The country needs capital investment essentially. So borrow from the market, and not the markets. Borrow from the bank. Build things, improve things, improve infrastructure. America needs to improve its infrastructure. Dear God, some of their roads are fucked. Sorry, Red Rust. Borrow from the central bank, pay it to the country, do stuff, nationalise water, nationalise utilities, broadband communism. Yeah, tax them more on their second properties, and if they're landlords, just tax them out of existence, essentially. You only need one fucking house. Fuck it, I'll let you have the most ostentatious house you can build. Fuck it. Or you can buy and build gravy if you want, or Chelsea. Or down in Kent or Surrey or somewhere, I don't know. Fucking a country pile, whatever. And I would raise up capital gains to the level of income tax as well. It's still too low, in my opinion. Raise that up. Corporate Helena said in the past that corporation tax is about correct, but capital gains isn't. Raise capital gains to the level of income tax, which is 24 or 25%. So I'd raise capital gains up as well, and a higher tax rate for second properties and shit like that. Ideally, that should be over 60%. But I'm just a mad Scottish Marxist, apparently, or a trot. Not quite. Used to be a trot, not now. Thanks. Just a classic Marxist, trying desperately to educate the working class. I've done it in my own wee way within my family, at least. I have my niece, ha ha ha, or nibbling if you wish. I've got to get out with their pronouns because I keep on forgetting. Sorry, sweetie.
Years just sucking all the money up and out of public institutions. We're going to make it something which comes across as a bit technocratic so it doesn't scare people. And if that's my provocation, my suggestion would be this, is that it's not the packaging of the politics that's the problem. In fact, the need is to renew and revive class politics to make any of this stuff happen.
Look, I think here's my response to that then. I think that MMT, and I will speak for myself specifically because I've given some of these talks. I gave a talk at a inaugural conference called the Tax the Rich Conference. And so I went in there and I gave the strong pitch for why we should tax the rich much more heavily, but not because we need their money. And so I know that for MMT economists, it isn't the case that we say, well, we don't need to tax the rich to get revenue to pay for programs, and therefore we can sort of ignore the dangers, the threat that comes with these, rising inequities and concentrations of wealth and power and class. And all the rest of it. Not at all. I think it's exactly the opposite, which is so ironic. So I'll give you just an example. Senator Elizabeth Warren. I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with Elizabeth Warren, but I think most people would probably say a Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders, a Senator Elizabeth Warren, probably come to mind for most people as the two most progressive members of Congress, probably the two most class-conscious members of Congress. And both of them have proposed things like a wealth tax and taxes on financial speculation and all that sort of stuff that I think would be probably appealing to you and to, sounds like, many of your listeners. Now, when I heard about Senator Warren's wealth tax proposal, and this was back, 2020, I guess, when she was running for president, and she was saying, look, with a little itty bitty tax on the wealthy, we could just have a tax of 2% on wealth, 50 million and higher, and then we add an extra 1% when they get to $1 billion, so it becomes 3% on wealth of $1 billion or more. We could take the revenue that we would get from that wealth tax, and we could have affordable childcare, we could cancel some student loan debt. And she said, and you know what? The wealthy won't even feel it. They won't even feel it because their wealth accumulates at a rate far above 3% per annum. So they're still going to get richer and richer and richer, to which I said, then what is the point? Then what is the point of a wealth tax if it isn't to aggressively get at concentrations of wealth and income and the class, the power and everything that goes with it? Because the answer is, it's just to pay for. It's just, you're peeling off just enough to barely touch them to say, I have the revenue to pay for my programs around childcare or whatever. When I'm telling you that MMT is about separating these fights so that your tax conversation is not intricately bound to the spending proposals, then you don't say, well, I want just enough revenue to cover the cost of what it is I'm trying to do. You separate the two and you say, what is it I want to accomplish in terms of dealing with people like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or whomever you perceive to be too wealthy in society and to have too much power and too much control over the lives of other people, and to rebalance distribution between capital and labor. And to get, I think you have a much stronger ally in MMT and in that framework when you're able to break yourself free of looking at tax for the sake of revenue and pay-fors, and you just say, let's just talk about how we want to reshape the tax code and so forth to address all of these other sorts of things.
Why do you think it is that mainstream economists have been so resistant to taking MMT seriously?
Because MMT turns on its head almost every core assumption in mainstream economics. I mean, it's, you don't want somebody to come in and tell you that at the root of your discipline, you've gone in the wrong direction from the get-go on almost every front. That's not,
Or what about governments? What about, people who work for the Treasury or, people who work for centre-left parties? I suppose the thing I'm asking is that if what MMT provides is a win-win-win, right? You get to turn the public spending taps on, you get to build all this infrastructure, and you get to do it potentially without having these big fights over wealth taxes which scare away the rich. Why aren't more centre-left parties embracing it wholeheartedly?
Well, I think it has been embraced. I think it was embraced during COVID. I think it became clear, the headlines all over the place here, whether it was Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, ran some version of we're all MMTers now. Look, years ago, I don't know how many people, your listeners, are familiar with the economist John Kenneth Galbraith. but he was one of the most important influential economists of the last century, right? A good old-fashioned Keynesian. His son is James Galbraith, also an economist. And Jamie, as I call him because he's a friend, wrote a piece many years ago in The Nation magazine called In Defense of Deficits. And Jamie answered, I think, well, your question, which is why do people oppose it? Well, first of all, it doesn't promise a free lunch. It isn't a win-win-win-win. There are losers. And Jamie's point in that article, In Defense of Deficits, was that government deficits compete with the private sector for finance. So here's the argument. Banks in particular don't like government deficits because they compete with banks who would like to lend people money for the sake of allowing them to spend, where a government deficit is putting the money directly into your hands. You own it free and clear. You don't have to pay it back, right? On the other side of every government deficit lies a surplus for someone else. That's yours. You own it free and clear. What banks do is lend money with interest. And so when government deficits are very large, as they were with COVID, and the government was sending people checks and increasing the amount that they paid to the unemployed and all the rest of it, people were flush with cash. Many people had money left over at the end of the month for the first time in their lives. They could save a little bit. They were able to get by without relying on borrowing. So it isn't the case. I mean, you can understand why not everyone is enthusiastic about MMT and its defense of public deficits, because it does create, in a sense, losers somewhere else. And Jamie's argument was that it challenges the lenders, right? Financial lenders, in a way that they don't like.
I mean, one of the outcomes of COVID spending, particularly in the UK, was that it made rich people even richer, even more quickly than they were before. So yes, money got put into the pockets of people, as you say, who may not have ever been able to save before. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the impact on overall inequality, it widened, right? You had you had more billionaires, I think, at the end of the crisis than you did before. How does, I guess, that outcome square with the broader political mission of dealing with these inequalities? Because if you're saying, okay, well, like one of the reasons why we should embrace MMT is because it takes the wrangling over taxation out of it. What do you say to, or what do you do in the face of the fact that inequality widened over that period of time?
Well,
rich people got even richer, even faster.
I think we have to look by country, and we have to be specific about what period of time we're looking at. I mean, we had widening inequality in the U.S. for the better part of my lifetime, right? Without an infusion of COVID spending and more going to billionaires and so forth. We also had about 40% of all the kids who were living in poverty lifted out of poverty in 1 year, right? Because of the expansion of the child tax credit in the US. We also had real wages beginning to grow over the course of the last 15 months or so. Real wages have been increasing in the US. Now, prior to COVID, real wages had been stagnant. I mean, this was a talking point of Senator Sanders during his 2 presidential campaigns, that since 1973, the real wage for the median worker in this country hadn't budged for centuries. So we've had long-standing trends in income and wealth inequality that we have to tackle, not just as a result of, the blowout in, what's happened with equity markets and billionaires getting richer and richer post-COVID. But these are not new trends, and they're not related to the spending that was done, fiscal expansion because of COVID. We have to tackle these. And this is why, MMT is not about setting aside the tax fight. It is that is important. It's just, as I said, you don't link it to your spending priorities.
I mean, I've got one final question, and it's to sort of circle right back round to something that you said at the beginning. You were talking about the pursuit of full employment, the possibility of something like a jobs guarantee. The first thing is why a jobs guarantee over something like universal basic income? What's the benefit of one over the other? And then the second thing is, really, is the purpose of a jobs guarantee so that the state has more power to shape its own industrial strategy and to direct labour towards bits of the economy that it would like to see become more productive, that maybe, private capital isn't investing in as much as it ought to be?
So that's the last part. I don't think that's what we have in mind with a job guarantee. If you want industrial policy, if you want large scale investments in manufacturing and climate and all the rest of it, you should just hire those people and do those things. That should just be part of, regular government programs. Make those investments, do those contracts, hire people if you're going to do it directly. Get people hired indirectly if you're going to, put out a bid and have the private sector engage in those things. That's completely separate from a job guarantee. So the job guarantee is there. Look, government should try to orient its economic policy, fiscal policy. Set your tax dial, get the tax code the way that you want the tax code to achieve outcomes, like dealing with income and wealth inequality and closing loopholes and fairness and all that. Get the tax code the way you want the tax code. Set spending to achieve objectives with inflation risk in mind. So set fiscal policy dials that way. Try to get the economy as close to full employment as you can using fiscal policy, and then recognize that there are always going to be people who get left out. It doesn't matter if there's one job vacancy for every job seeker. There's going to be a mismatch. There are going to be people who don't have the skills to fill the jobs that are available. You don't, have jobs in the geographic regions where they're needed, whatever. There are going to be millions of people who want to work, want to contribute, and cannot find a job anywhere else in the economy that is suitable. So what we've said is the federal government should then ensure that anybody who's ready, willing, and able to work can be employed at some base wage benefit package, federally funded, locally administered, because every single one of those people is, a bundle of energy and willingness and a fellow citizen who wants to contribute in some way, but has been locked out of that opportunity. Why? It's cruel. Let them work, let them contribute, allow them to do something useful in the community. And that's what the job guarantee is in part about. It's also about providing better price stability so that, when the economy goes through a business cycle and the, downturn begins and employers start laying workers off, a job guarantee absorbs those workers. They don't become unemployed. They can transition into the federal job guarantee program, have their skills either maintained or upgraded. They remain employable because the last person an employer wants to hire is an unemployed person. They would rather hire somebody from their competitor, pick them off.
Oh, dear God. I think I just had a horrible reaction to my juice, to my diluting juice. Give me a second. Oh, no. Oh, fucking stabilizer again. Oh, God. There's a stabilizer that gets used in concentrates that has this horrible reaction to me because I've got stomach issues. My my lower part of my stomach and the upper part of my intestines got severely damaged by NSAIDs when I was younger. And if I have this if I ingest too much of the stabilizer, my stomach just says nope, because it'll make my issue worse. So my body's just built up an intolerance to it, and I you don't want to know. Ugh, there we go. H2O. I'm going to have to give that just to Super Hubby now. Oh, I'm feeling better now because I've got rid of it. It's out of my system. I'll just take another swig of water, actually. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, much better.
At higher wages, which has the potential to be more inflationary than if you maintain a pool of employed workers out of which the private sector can come and hire when they're ready to staff back up. So it's more efficient, it's more humane.
Thank you.
It makes more sense economically, socially, right? All of the tensions that happen when people experience unemployment, worse health outcomes, more crime. I mean, the whole gamut, right? It just, for all those reasons, makes more sense to us to have this program. Now, you mentioned a basic income. Why not just give people money? Well, you don't have many of the benefits that I just described. And I think, in light of the inflation that we experienced recently and the way that it has been spun by many as simply the result of doing exactly that, giving people money in a time of crisis, that's why we got the highest inflation in 40 years. I think UBI is just a much heavier lift now, even than it was before. And I think it was a heavy lift before, but I really feel like politically it's going to be harder for those who advocate.
That money will still end up going to the top 1 or 2%, by the way, because if you give the universal basic income, we're still going to have to spend it on like our bills, utilities, travel, food, things of that nature. So it'll still end up going up to them. It's still capitalism still exists. So UBI in a capitalist system is just they'll end up getting the money anyway because we'll be paying our bills, paying for gas, electricity, our transportation, buying a car, whatever, mortgage, rent. So it will just end up back in their bank accounts, usually not in the country that they're earning in. We're one of the most financially secretive countries in on the planet, by the way. All those former colonial holdings, good few, most of them, UK.
UBI, because it's just they give people money, and the job guarantee increases both output, supply, and demand by paying people a wage to help increase the production of whether it's childcare or food or whatever it is. And so I think there are just benefits on the job guarantee side that aren't there on the UBI side. And I think, for better or worse, it's going to be a heavier lift for advocates of UBI because of the inflationary episode. It's not that I'm opposed, and I think most MMTers have embraced both over the years, that we should have both an income guarantee in the form of something like a basic income support for people who, as Martin Luther King Jr. put it, for those who cannot or should not be working. And that can be defined as broadly as you like. It could include new parents. It could include people who have to care or want to care for, you know, a relative or something, you can define that. But we definitely think that, you know, it should include the opportunity for people who want to work to have the right to a job as well.
Stephanie Kelton, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So they are training, say, even of, you know, judges.
Ooh, like I said earlier on, I have a GP. I've got a doctor's appointment at 10:40 a.m. Yeah. So having UBI in the capitalist framework, it'll just end up going back up to them. So means of reduction, anyone? Back in public hands, co-ops, worker owned, blah blah blah. That's the things that we need to be talking about more and yelling at these fucking financial ghouls, really. Should be doing this, man. Yeah, I think I'll actually read out. Let's go and see how Shanna's going. Or is it Cappy that's live? I'm not sure. I'm sure it's Shanna. Let's go and say hi to Cranky Pants. Do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do. Twitch. Great. I still haven't figured out how to read on YouTube. I will figure it out, or I'll get either Kev or Helen to help me. It's Shanna! Let's go and say hi to Shanna. Oh, there she's there.
Pompeii
Oh,
is extremely fragile, and it's always a fight, a battle against time. Excavating is also a huge responsibility. You have to restore and protect what you excavate forever. And so it's an enormous challenge to preserve this site for future generations.
Stay hydrated. Watch what's in your concentrates.
We do not have constant excavations uncovering new regions of Pompeii, but when it does happen, it's incredibly exciting because the potential to find something brand new is right there. Anything that we find can change what we know about this city.
And who else is doing. Thank you, everyone. This has been amazing.
As the dig begins, the team need heavy machinery to reach the original floor level, buried under 5 meters of pumice and ash.